Hey, what's going on, guys? So we're back here with another cigar review, but today's review is going to be a little different. So today is going to be a pairing, and what we're going to be pairing today is the JC Newman Angel Cuesta, which is a cigar that I've been meaning to try since like 2023. This is a cigar that I've seen not usually in person. Not very many retailers near me carry this. In fact, I've only ever seen one that actually has this. And it's one that I have heard good things about over the years and just never had the opportunity to try. So that said, I'm very much looking forward to this. This is the 6x52 Double Toro. Not sure why they call it a Double Toro, but Double Toro. You see you got a little pigtail cap here and a closed foot. It's some pretty ornate banding. So this will be an Ecuadorian Habano Rosado wrapper over undisclosed binders and fillers. These are rolled at the El Reloj factory in Tampa, Florida. Most of the JC Newmans that I prefer to smoke get rolled at Tabacalera Fuente, like the Diamond Crown series, specifically the Julius Caesar, which is one of my favorites, as well as the Black Diamond. And today we are going to be pairing that cigar. Sorry, it's a bit noisy out here. It's nice. We're going to be pairing that cigar with another new addition to the collection. This is the Bruichladdich 18 year. So I'm a huge fan of Bruichladdich. Port Charlotte 10 year is actually the Scotch that got me into peated scotches. Now that Bruichladdich 18 year is an unpeated scotch. They also do make unpeated scotches, but they're mostly known for their peated scotches. The Port Charlotte line, the Octomore line. They also have a few unpeated lines like Bruichladdich, which is their namesake, as well as the Dark Arts collection, which is usually hyper-aged scotch. And some of you bourbon drinkers out there might be looking at that 18 year and be like, isn't that hyper-aged? Not really. Scotch is a little bit different. We'll get into why it's way more normal to see 15, 18, 20, 21, 30 year age scotches than it is bourbons. But that said, let's go ahead and get into this cigar. So we're just going to take a normal straight cut today. Beautiful cut. Great draw. All right, so let's see if we can get this off without any problems. Yep, slides right off, so that's nice. And overall, this is a beautiful wrapper leaf. Not quite perfect, but minimal veins and pretty tight but visible seams. Overall, this thing smells incredible. Very much looking forward to this. Closed foot. So when you see a closed foot, you typically don't want to use a torch lighter right off the bat. You can, but ideally, and the traditional thing to do at that point is to use a soft flame. Nice sweet spice off of that that wrapper leaf. Getting some black pepper and some red pepper spice, and just like a hint of sweet cinnamon. So this is where I'll touch up this light and make sure everything's nice and evenly lit with the torch. Oh, great draw, good smoke production. There's a dried fruit note It's a little tart. Not sour, just a little tart, like a tarty, fruity note. But still plenty of that spice, that red pepper spice and that black pepper spice that I was getting on Light Up. Retrohale is pretty smooth. I would say the sting on a retro is probably like a 3, maybe a 4. You can retrohale the entire draw. And so far, that's all I got on Light Up. But since we also have a whiskey to pair here, this is your Bruichladdich 18 year. Now, as you can see, there's quite a bit of color on that, right? It's not super dark like some of you bourbon drinkers might be expecting, right? But there's a reason for that. So with Scotch, you gotta understand how Scotch is aged versus like say bourbon, right? So with bourbon is matured by law in virgin oak barrels or new oak barrels. Those barrels get charred and those barrels have a lot of flavor and color to impart onto the whiskey, right? Usually with Scotch, you're going to have first fill, second fill, third fill barrels. Now what that means is, even if you're talking about a first fill, because this is where it can get kind of confusing, it means that that barrel has been used for some other purpose prior to aging Scotch, right? So a first fill bourbon, ex-bourbon barrel will be a barrel that was used at one point to mature bourbon. And then that distillery who's making Scotch bought that barrel. And now this is the first time they're putting Scotch in it. If it was a second or third fill barrel, then it would literally be the second or third time that Scotch has been used in it. And the more you use a barrel, the less that barrel has to give. So the less flavor and less color, the less influence that barrel has on the whiskey. So most of the Scotches you'll see on the market nowadays usually use ex-bourbon barrels. They could be first fill, second fill, whatever, but they're usually ex-bourbon barrels. Most of this Bruichladdich 18 is ex-bourbon barrel, but there's also some Sauternes cask and port casks that were used, meaning Sauternes wine, which is a dessert wine, usually imparts a very sweet influence on the whiskey, and port, which can more or less do the same thing. But if you actually have a bottle of this Bruichladdich 18 year, then you could actually take your batch number, go on Bruichladdich website, and they'll give you the entire breakdown. How many barrels that batch was, when those barrels were barreled, when they were dumped. Also gives you exactly what barrels, what kind of influence those barrels had. So like there's also some Oloroso sherry influence in here. Not very much, mostly ex-bourbon, Sauternes, and port, but there is some Oloroso sherry in here. And then so this here is actually just a recycled paper cover, which I really like. They ship them in these now instead of the old school tubes. Which were nice, but at the same time took up a lot of space. So what you do is you just pull from here, and then this just comes off with a clamshell. And then inside, you have your bottle, obviously. So as you guys can see, even though this is relatively new to my collection, I've had a few drams of this already. This is a phenomenal whiskey. I've been mostly buying cigars recently, haven't bought too much whiskey, just a bottle here and there, but this is one that as soon as I seen it, I knew I had to have it because I've absolutely adore Bruichladdich. Most of the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, I've been focused almost solely on bourbon, but this just might be the Scotch that brings me back to Scotch for a little while, at least. So as you guys can see, they call this one Redefined. And then aged 18 years. What also makes this a an interesting one is, or unique release, is that this is bottled at 100 proof. It is very rare to see high-aged scotches, really any scotches, but high-aged scotches released at 50% ABV. Most of the time when you get these hyper-aged scotches, they want to get their money back, right? And so they're usually going to dilute it down. So you're going to see them at 40% ABV, 43% ABV. On the higher end, maybe 46 ABV. But with these higher aged expressions, it's not normal. It's not commonplace to see them at 50% ABV. So, all right. So, that said, just looking at this, super viscous. I mean, you can even tell just by the way the whiskey moves. It's very viscous. This is non-chill filtered, no color added, and at 50%, aged 18 years. You can tell that that barrel has imparted quite a bit of oils into this whiskey. And I mean, again, you could just tell by how the way the whiskey moves. This is not a thin whiskey at all. So let's go ahead, and you can see the way it coats the glass. I don't know if you guys can get that on camera, but it's holding very well. Those are some pretty thick, slow running legs. And the nose on this thing is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there's a white grape note. That comes off of this thing that is abnormal. You don't usually get a white grape note on whiskey, assuming that's the wine cask influence. There's honey, malt, tons of malt, and it's not burning the nostrils at all. Like, you can really get in there, and even at 50% ABV, like there's no burn whatsoever. There's a grainy note to it, like a wheat note. And there's a citrus note, almost a lemony citrus note. That mouthfeel is so good. It's so smooth. It just coats the palate and sits there and just evolves. Almost all of those notes translate to the palate immediately. And with the Angel Cuesta, it's a very nice compliment. These pair very well together because neither the whiskey or the cigar is too overbearing. They both have good intense bits of flavor, but nothing that overwhelms or burns out the palate at all. So you can kind of get the best of both. There's a nice, again, dried fruit note on here. That's like the through tone. There's a tiny hint of leather. That black pepper spice is really toned down, but that red pepper spice is there, which is kind of enhancing the fruitiness of the cigar. And then there's also a nuttiness. It's kind of indescript. It's not like an almond or a walnut or a pecan. It's just a general nuttiness. But it's not super strong. It's more of like a complementary note. Overall, so far, good cigar. There's still that cinnamon there, but it's mostly at the back of the palate, almost on the finish. And there's almost like a nutmeg note as well. So, but this 18 year, this is special. So I ended up buying one bottle. I happened to just stop by the liquor store the other day just to look around, see what they had. I do the same thing with my cigar shops. I just stop in, even if I don't plan on buying anything. If I'm in the area, couldn't hurt to look. And it happened to notice they had the 18 year. So I bought it just immediately, just because I know I love Bruichladdich, and I've been wanting the 18 year since they introduced it a few years ago. But this has superseded my expectations. Absolutely love this. So that citrus transfers, that maltiness transfers. That white grape on the palate is almost like a grapefruit. There's a honey note. There's tons of malt. There's some funky, there's some dark, like almost dank funky notes. It's a very bright whiskey. It's a very bright whiskey. But there's a funky, dark undertone, almost like a sherry influence, that kind of tones it down and balances out all that brightness. But overall, very beautiful whiskey. So I'm gonna go ahead and smoke this cigar down probably to about the halfway point, or unless there are any significant changes, I'll let you guys know. Okay, so real quick update. Not necessarily an update on flavor, although we do have the addition of a light citrus note and a cookie-ish, almost graham cracker type note, kind of like shortbread, a shortbread note, which is very interesting on a cigar. But I wanted to update you guys on the performance. So while the ash is fairly compact and hanging in there, this burn just will not stay straight. I've corrected it a few times. I decided to let this one go, at least just for this update. And as you guys can see, it's pretty wonky, and I don't think that's going to correct itself. So for the sake of the flavor, I'm going to go on ahead and correct that myself. All right, so we're not quite at that halfway point, but I did just correct that burn as I told you guys I would do. And that shortbread cookie note is still there at the forefront, actually. But what I wanted to touch on was in this pairing, there's a vanilla cream note that is heavy on this scotch, and paired with that shortbread note coming off of this cigar, absolutely phenomenal experience. Like, it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon out here. It's low 60s. I'm out here in a t-shirt, and I am thoroughly enjoying myself pairing these two. While we're here also, I'll touch on the price. So this Angel Cuesta, I believe when they first came out, we're going for about 19 bucks. I paid $19.99, so roughly 20 bucks plus tax for this cigar, which so far it's smoking like a $20 cigar. Great construction, flawless draw, great smoke production, solid flavors. And this 18-year Bruichladdich, price is kind of all over the place because it's an import. When it first came out, I know that there was a lot of fluctuation in the pricing. There was quite a bit of markups, especially if you were in the States. But I picked this up. I live in a price controlled state. I picked this up for $180 plus tax at my local liquor store. One of my local liquor stores. So neither of these are cheap dates. And the whiskey itself is a little bit of an oddity because just a few years ago, I mean, you're talking about an 18-year-old scotch, whether it was like Bruichladdich, Glenlivet, etc. Just a few years ago, those scotches, those 18-year-old scotches would be around $120, $130, right? Typically. And that's in the States. If you're like me and you're willing to actually import your own whiskeys, then you might even pay closer to 90 to 100 bucks, you know, before you start getting the international shipping, which pretty much balances out, right? Once you factor in 40, 50 bucks for international shipping, then whatever money you're saving buying directly from, you know, the UK or Scotland or wherever, it typically balances out the difference between what you'll pay for the bottle, shipping it in, and what you'll pay at your local liquor store if they have it. Now that's really the key. There's going to be a limited selection of Irish and Scotch whiskeys because those are all imported whiskeys, right? Bourbons, on the other hand, with the exception of allocated bourbons, you're usually going to have a ton of variety in terms of your selection, with the exception of if something's heavily allocated, or if it's region specific, or if it's a smaller brand that just hasn't branched out into other states and other regions yet. So overall, though, very much enjoying myself. I drink a lot of high proof whiskeys whenever I do drink whiskey. I don't drink as much as I was at one point, just for the simple fact that, like, I was exploring. But even now, you know, when I do opt for an alcoholic pairing or an alcoholic beverage over, say, like a coffee or a tea or a water or something like that, typically, I go for something higher proof, even higher than 100 proof, like usually something around 110 and up, preferably 120, 130s, maybe even hazmat. But again, haven't really been sipping as much recently. And at 100 proof, you know, a lot of whiskeys, depending on the whiskey itself, how it was aged, you could still generally get a nice little Kentucky hug, a nice little burn. There's absolutely nothing on that whiskey. It's 50%. It drinks like 40 or 43. It could easily be mistaken for an 86 or an 80 proof whiskey. But that's it though. I'm gonna keep smoking this and I'll let you guys know if anything else changes. Okay guys, so here we are, roughly the halfway point in this thing. And the main flavor notes I'm getting off of this now are still that shortbread cookie, which is awesome, as well as that citrus, and on the back end, that dried fruit tart note, almost a berry-like note, is still hanging in there, but it's not at the forefront of this thing as it was during the first third. It's still there again, but it's very, very faint. And overall, this is still a very enjoyable cigar. Draw still phenomenal, smoke output's phenomenal, and as you can see, that burn line, still not perfect, but way better than it was since that major correction. Got a little bit of cracking and splitting here, but I don't think that's going to be a problem for anything. And overall, this has been a highly enjoyable cigar. As far as the Scotch, I don't think I have to say too much about it. The flavors are the flavors. Now that it's gotten some air, still that vanilla cream, that citrus, that malt. Very, very, very little burn. Great mouthfeel. More of the same. The honey note has ramped up on that Scotch considerably, and it is complementing the hell out of this cigar. So I'm gonna keep smoking this down, and I'll see you guys in that final third, unless anything changes. All right, so in this final third, still getting that shortbread cookie, although the flavor isn't quite as intense as it was throughout most of this cigar. But there's also now the addition of a leather note. So this is definitely a mild to medium cigar in terms of strength, in terms of flavor intensity, and despite it being a Rosado Habano, the pepper dies down and kind of falls off very quickly in this cigar. Not really a bad deal. It's there through most of the first third, but by the time you get to that second third, it's mostly shortbread with like hints of black pepper here and there. At this point, it's still that shortbread, not very much, if any, pepper. There's a leather note that's starting to peek through on this, and overall, it's just been a very enjoyable cigar. So I'm gonna go ahead and smoke this down to the end, and I'll see you guys then and give you my final verdict. All right, guys, so here we are at the end of this one. I'm not quite finished with it, but I definitely know where this thing stands as far as my perception of it. I would rate this thing straight up a B+. Wasn't a super complex cigar, but had really, really good flavors and really consistent flavors, most of which are still there. A lot of cigars fall off a cliff in the final third. This did not. It was good from start to finish. I will say, overall, the construction was great. No soft spots, great draw, decent burn, but I did have to babysit that burn line quite a bit. I relit this thing more times than I cared to, but I'm not going to hold that against it in this particular instance, only because I did not go through my usual process of dry boxing my cigars and making sure they're in the best possible state to smoke. I bought this thing probably about a week ago, give or take, a little over a week ago maybe, and it's been sitting in my Peter James case ever since. So it didn't really have the best chance. You guys know, especially if I'm doing a review on a cigar, I generally want a cigar to dry box and get to a very specific moisture level, just because if anything like that does go wrong, I can attribute that to the cigar and not to me, user error. I'm going to attribute that to user error in this instance. Overall though, good cigar from start to finish. Very much enjoyed it. But what I will say is this Bruichladdich 18 year, it carried today. This was overall a good experience, a good pairing, and this was the star of the show by far. I see myself buying a backup bottle of this very soon because it's something I want to be drinking for years to come. Overall though, good stick, Would buy again. I don't think I'd buy a box. I definitely wouldn't buy a box at the $20 per stick price tag that these carry MSRP. But I could see myself maybe discounted or something buying a box at that point. But it is definitely a stick I want to keep a couple on hand on, because it's definitely something I'll revisit in the future. But overall, solid cigar, and I can recommend that you at least try it. Can't necessarily recommend the box, but I can definitely recommend that you at least try the cigar. So, per the usual, guys, appreciate you. Appreciate the love and support. I'll catch you guys on the next one.